there you sit. You're wearing soft clothes, in a permanent dwelling, with curtains to shield you from the public gaze. Once, only gods and kings could live as you do now. The only chairs were thrones. The only curtains were veils for the sacred. Culture's become global in our time. Through the resources available to you around the room and through this screen, you can receive messages from distant places and times. You have a kind of omniscience. A human slave who's a lot of trouble can deliver the labor power of, say, 0.5 kilowatt. But just one of the sockets on your wall gives you the labor power of 6 slaves with no trouble at all. Your personal transport can carry you seated wherever you please. Once, and it's not so very long ago, only the gods traveled like this. Only they could ride through the heavens in chariots, and they alone wielded the power of electricity in the lightning flash. Only they could tell of the birth of the stars and the secret of life. Now we can. It's scarcely surprising that we've become an enigma to ourselves. We're products of the modern age, and yet we're ill at ease in it. In our leisure hours, and still more in our thinking, we prefer the past. Our souls are like the bars of our hostelries, crammed with pseudo-antiques because we find the modern too bleak and hard to live with. If you've ever felt that, then you may have gone on to think that the time must come when the amount of sheer falsehood around becomes too great. Someone chokes on it. He becomes determined to reject all illusions and see whether genuine passion and dignity can be restored to human life today. There has been such a man, Friedrich Nietzsche, the chief prophet of the modern age. Nietzsche first came to this part of the Upper Engadin in Switzerland in July 1881. A frail man of 36 years, he was now committed to the life of a solitary wanderer. He was the first great philosopher after Darwin. Man was now utterly alone in the universe, so Nietzsche would be alone. Carrying with him little else but one large trunk, filled mainly with books and papers, Nietzsche eventually found lodgings in this house in Sils Maria. He came to this room and went straight to bed for 3 days of migraine and vomiting. Then he cautiously took up the daily routine that Stefan Zweig has described.
Carefully the myopic man sits down in the small, narrow, modest, coldly furnished room, where innumerable notes, pages, writings, and proofs are piled up on the table, but no flower, no decoration. On a tray, innumerable bottles and jars and potions against the migraines, which often render him all but senseless for hours, against his stomach cramps, against the slothful intestines, and above all, the dreadful sedatives against his insomnia, chloral hydrate and veronal. A frightful arsenal of poisons and drugs, yet the only helpers in the empty silence of this strange room. Wrapped in his overcoat and a woolen scarf, his fingers freezing, his double glasses pressed close to the paper, his hurried hand writes for hours. Words the dim eyes can hardly decipher. For hours he sits like this and writes until his eyes burn.
Nietzsche was the son of a German Lutheran pastor who died tragically mad. Young Friedrich was ambitious from boyhood. He had hopes of becoming an artist. He drew, wrote poetry, composed music. Then he became a scholar. He was a professor of classical philology at Basel University by the age of 24. A good horseman, he did 12 months military service, but was injured in a riding accident. He was eventually compelled to resign from the university through ill health, and was awarded a small pension, enough to enable him to take up the life of a freelance writer and philosopher. For some 7 years, Nietzsche had been a close disciple of Wagner, until he finally broke away to become Wagner's most vehement critic. The only time his bachelor life was seriously disturbed was by his unsatisfactory relationship with the volatile and difficult Lou Salome. With his friend Paul Ray, he formed an irregular platonic friendship with her, but she whipped them both, as he recognized when he posed this photograph. After losing them, he became lonelier than ever. Nietzsche's philosophy represents a violent break with tradition. Zarathustra, his best-known book, was written to replace the New Testament, its central figure being the ancient Persian prophet Zoroaster, or Zarathustra. Why attempt such a book? Because of the extreme crisis that Nietzsche had described in the parable of the madman.
Ich suche Gott! Ich suche Gott!
A madman lit a lantern in the morning and ran to the marketplace crying, I am looking for God. I am looking for God.
Ich suche Gott! Ich suche Gott! Ich suche Gott! Ich suche Gott!
Unbelievers standing around laughed at him. Has God got lost? Has he gone away? Is he hiding?
Wohin ist Gott? Ich will es euch sagen. Wir haben ihn getötet. Ihr und ich. Wir alle sind seine Mörder.
We have killed God. All of us are his murderers. How could we have done it? We have wiped away the horizon and unloosed the earth from the sun. Don't you feel how cold it's getting? Won't we have to light lanterns in the morning?
Müssen nicht Laternen haben.
There was a baffled silence. And then the madman smashed the lantern. I've come too soon. It's not time yet. The news of the death of God hasn't got here yet. The light of the stars needs time to reach the earth. Deeds need time before they can be seen and heard. Yet they have done it themselves. This is the great spectacle of 100 acts that will occupy Europe for the next 2 centuries. The most terrible, but also the most hopeful of all spectacles.
In European thought, God had been the ground of being, of knowledge, of truth, of moral value. For Nietzsche, the loss of faith in God meant that the world and everything that human beings had hitherto lived by was disintegrating. Nietzsche saw himself as the paradoxical prophet of a past event. The greatest event of all had happened about a century before, but people still hadn't heard about it. They couldn't take in the implications of it. It meant the end of metaphysics, the end of belief in any kind of objective order or value in the world that might guide human life and support it and give it meaning. A spectre was haunting Europe, far worse than the one Karl Marx had dreamt of, the spectre of nihilism.
My anger broke graves open, moved boundary stones, and rolled old, shattered law tables into deep chasms. My mockery blew away mouldered words and came like a broom to the cross spiders and as a scouring wind to old sepulchres. I sat rejoicing where old gods lay buried. world blessing, world loving. For I love even churches and the graves of gods.
Nietzsche was temperamentally religious. Nobody has felt the loss of faith more keenly than he. He had to find a new faith, a new way of saying yes to life. For the loss of belief in God meant the loss of belief in progress, even in linear time. Maybe nature moves forever in meaningless, futile circles. If so, then Nietzsche's own life of ceaseless pain would be endlessly repeated. Could he say yes even to that, the eternal recurrence?
I was walking that day through the woods beside the lake of Silvaplana. I stopped beside a mighty pyramidal stone. Then this idea came to me, the idea of eternal recurrence. It was jotted down on a piece of paper with the inscription, 6,000 feet above man and time.
As long as his mind lasted, Nietzsche believed that this revelation had been a supreme moment in world history. The idea of eternal recurrence had been the test of whether he was able to say yes to life, and he'd passed it. He puts it like this. Suppose that in your loneliest loneliness, a little gnawing demon creeps into your heart, and he says to you, you'll have to live this whole life over again with every pain and sorrow and joy and thought and sigh. Over and over again. In the endless permutations of the world, the sandglass of existence will be turned over, and you with it, you speck of dust. Now, how will you reply to that demon? Will you curse him? Or has there been a moment in your life so great that it's redeemed everything else, and you answer, you're a god, I never heard anything so divine? If you can say that, then indeed you can say yes to life. You're going to have to live this whole life of yours all over again, and again after that, with every joy and pain and sigh and thought and sorrow, just as it's been. In the endless permutations of the world, the sandglass of existence will be turned over and over, and you with it, you speck of dust. Now, how you reply to that demon? In Sils Maria today, Christian Doremer, actor and Nietzsche enthusiast, takes small parties of people on what he calls philosophical excursions.
Das ist ein Satz, der am Anfang der philosophischen Exkursion gut sitzt. Gehen wir.
He recites texts from Nietzsche in the landscape in which they were composed.
Midday. Moment of the shortest shadow. End of the longest era. Zenith of mankind. Zarathustra begins. When Zarathustra arrived at the nearest of the towns lying against the forest, he found in that very place many people assembled in the market square. And Zarathustra spoke thus to the people.
Meine Brüder, bleibt der Erde treu. Nicht eure Sünde schreit gen Himmel. Eure Genügsamkeit schreit gen Himmel. Der Geiz selbst in eurer Genügsamkeit, in eurer Sünde schreit gen Himmel.
I entreat you, my brothers, remain true to the earth, and do not believe those who speak to you of super-terrestrial hopes. They are mixing poison, whether they know it or not. It was the sick and dying who despised the body and the earth and invented the things of heaven and the redeeming drops of blood. They wanted to escape from their misery, and the stars were too far for them. Then they sighed, oh, if only there were heavenly paths by which to creep into another existence and into happiness. Then they contrived for themselves their secret ways and their draughts of blood. It is not your sin, but your moderation that cries to heaven. Your very meanness in sinning cries to heaven.
Wo ist der Blitz, der euch mit seiner Zunge lecke? Wo ist der Wahnsinn, mit dem ihr geimpft werden müsstet?
Where is the lightning to lick you with its tongue? Where is the madness with which you should be cleansed? Behold, I teach you the Superman. His is this lightning. He is this madness.
Also sprach Zarathustra.
Yes, the Superman is commonly taken to be a kind of antichrist figure, the opposite of the Christian ideal. But Nietzsche's relation to Christianity is rather ambiguous. He's Christianity's greatest opponent, but if you criticize it as well as that, then you can't help, in spite of yourself, functioning as a reformer. And Nietzsche was like Jesus in that he prophesied a coming catastrophe and said that human beings would have to change to rise to the challenge of it. He's religious in his passionate belief in the spiritual life, in his belief that you must go through the worst to reach the best, in his belief that there is a breakthrough, a kind of salvation to be attained. It's been said that the 20th century was born in this room in the 1880s. After pushing skepticism to its furthest limit, Nietzsche finds a whole series of new ideas coming to birth in him. Everything is necessary, therefore everything is innocent. Every sort of idealism which is discontented with reality as it is exposed as a damaging illusion that makes us hate ourselves and hate life. Instead, Nietzsche offers what he calls the innocence of becoming. When we really know ourselves and our desires, then it's innocent and right that we should choose our own values on the basis of our own desires. We consciously and innocently accept life's own self-affirmation and make it our own. And the very fact that this new life-affirming, egoistic ethic is itself only another rationalization makes it playful, irresponsible. As Nietzsche says, this is goodwill to appearance. We learn to dance with the dream and are numbered with the masters of ceremonies of existence. He calls it amor fati, the love of necessity. We accept the world as it is without regrets and without any false moralism.
Keine größere Macht fand Zarathustra auf Erden als Gut und Böse.
Zarathustra has found no greater power on earth than good and evil. But much that seemed good to one people seemed shame and disgrace to another.
Eine Tafel der
A
Güte.
table of values hangs over every people.
Siehe,
Behold, it is the voice of its will to power.
du sollst Vater und Mutter ehren und bis in die Wurzeln der Seele hinein ihnen zu Willen sein.
To honor father and mother and to do their will even from the roots of the soul. A people hung this table over itself and became mighty and eternal with it. The love that wants to rule and the love that wants to obey created together such tables as these. But can you furnish yourself with your own good and evil and hang up your own will above yourself as a law?
Also,
It is terrible to be alone the judge and avenger of one's own law. It is to be like a star thrown forth into empty space and into the icy breath of solitude. Thus spoke Zarathustra.
In the past, each people had believed their own morality to be absolute and objective. Priests had backed it with the authority of God, and philosophers had set out to justify it. But Nietzsche says, no, this is a mistake. The first task is to explain morality, because morality is human. It has a history, and that history needs to be told. As for the morality of the future, it'll be autonomous. People are going to have to recognize that they themselves are the only source of the values that they live by, and their ethic will be one of self-realization. Nietzsche feared that the 20th century, the century of industrialism, of nationalism, of mass democracy, would be an age of slave morality. The masses would clamour for anyone to lead them, to give them security, to give them employment and a cause. He says, don't let it happen. And that's why at the end, Zarathustra urges his disciples to go away. They must follow themselves. They must become what they are. They must learn to go their own way.
Allein gehe ich nun, meine Jünger, und auch ihr geht davon und allein.
I must go away alone, my disciples. You too, now, go away and be alone. Truly, I advise you, go away from me and guard yourselves against Zarathustra. Better still, be ashamed of him.
Und wehrt euch!
Perhaps he has deceived you.
Oder besser noch, schämt euch seiner. Vielleicht betrug er euch.
One repays a teacher badly if one remains only a pupil.
Ihr verehrt mich. Aber wie wenn eure Verehrung eines Tages umfällt. Hütet euch, dass euch nicht eine Bildsäule erschlage.
You respect me. But how if one day your respect should tumble? Take care that a falling statue doesn't strike you dead. You say you believe in Zarathustra, but of what importance is Zarathustra? You are my believers, but of what importance are all believers?
Ihr hattet euch noch nicht gesucht, da fandet ihr mich. So tun alle Gläubigen. Darum ist es so wenig mit allem Glauben.
You had not yet sought yourselves when you found me. Thus do all believers. Therefore all belief is of so little account.
Nun heiße ich euch, mich verlieren.
Now I bid you lose me and find yourselves.
Und euch finden. Also sprach Zarathustra.
On the 20th of September 1888, Nietzsche left Sils Maria for the last time and went south to Italy. He thought all was going well with him. In that year he wrote 6 books in which he reached a peak of excess and black literary brilliance.
Here in Turin, I exercise a perfect fascination. Everyone glances at me, as if I were a prince. Everything succeeds, although it's not likely that anyone has ever had such great things on his hands. There's a special distinction in the way doors are held open for me, meals set out.
His mind was breaking. By December, his features had become uncontrollable and he twitched and grimaced ceaselessly. His handwriting deteriorated. He thought he would soon rule the world. On January the 3rd, Nietzsche looked down from his window and saw a cab driver beating his horse in the piazza below. He rushed downstairs to intervene, but the event triggered his total collapse. Nietzsche never recovered his sanity and was nursed by his mother for the rest of his life. He who had thought that one should die like Socrates, freely, quickly, and at the right moment, lingered on for 10 wretched years. Some have thought that there may have been a link between his philosophy and his madness. For Nietzsche's Superman has to say yes to meaninglessness, destruction, to chaos and alienation even within the self. To try to say yes to all that, for a person as passionately honest as Nietzsche, was to be forced to the edge of the abyss.
Did I not seek where the wind bites keenest? Learn to live where no one lives. In the wilderness, where only the polar bear lives. Unlearn to pray and curse. Unlearn man and God. Become a ghost, flitting across the glaciers.
The final tragedy that overtook Nietzsche was the cruelest of all. In his madness, his sister took control of his literary affairs. It was she who linked his name with proto-Nazi ideas that he had detested. His reputation has still not fully recovered. Nietzsche's proclamation of the death of God marks the beginning of the modern age, the age in which science and technology have largely replaced religion as the bodies of knowledge and the activities that society depends on and lives by. At least one traditional understanding of what God means was at an end. Yet the theme wasn't novel. As we've seen, it's been building up for centuries. Even as far back as Galileo, the idea was already coming in that the way the world works is neither moral nor purposive, but simply mechanical. A mechanical universe no longer reveals any guiding hand at work in it, so the new secular scientific worldview cannot give the old kind of support to religious belief. It seems that faith must be separated from cosmology, our theory of the world, and become more inward and ethical. As we've seen in this series, many Christian thinkers have been attempting just that. Pascal turned away from the objective God of the philosophers and sought a new way to a hidden God known by the heart. Kierkegaard sought to keep God's transcendence, but within the sphere of the spiritual life. Jung's God was an image buried deep in the psyche of the whole self that we are to become. Albert Schweitzer's God was an ethical inspiration, the ground of the will to love. These thinkers were moving away from the old cosmic, literal theism. Instead, they saw God as hidden in the heart, by which they meant perhaps as the soul's guiding ideal. A new idea of God has been slowly taking shape, but perhaps nobody yet had managed to spell it out entirely satisfactorily. Well, we've one more thinker still to meet, as remarkable a character as perhaps anyone else in this series. In the autumn of 1908, he came here to Manchester University's Aeronautical Engineering Laboratory. He was 19 years old, and his name was Ludwig Wittgenstein. He was an impulsive, sociable character, at that time still very well-to-do. He was highly musical. He made many friends, but he didn't have much to say about his exotic background. Wittgenstein was a product of Vienna in the last days of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His father was its leading steel magnate. The 9 talented children grew up in surroundings of the utmost opulence. But they belonged to a new generation which rejected this high bourgeois culture, preferring modernism in art, Puritanism in morals, and truth and simplicity in all things. This outlook shows in Wittgenstein's early choice of engineering as an honest profession. In Manchester, he designed and then began to build a jet reaction engine that would deliver the thrust at the tip of the blades. Over 30 years later, aircraft such as the Fairey Gyrodyne were built on this principle. But 1910 was too early, and in any case, Wittgenstein's life was about to change. To design his propeller, he needed mathematics. Now, any ordinary mathematician just does mathematics, but Wittgenstein asked himself the fatal question, what is mathematics? Why is it so powerful? And what are numbers? By the autumn of 1911, he'd found out who was the best philosopher of mathematics alive, and he simply presented himself as a student to Bertrand Russell at Cambridge.
He was queer, and his notions seemed to me odd. He came to me and said, "Will you please tell me whether I am a complete idiot or not? Because if I am a complete idiot, I shall become an aeronaut, but if not, I shall become a philosopher." I told him to write me something during the vacation on some philosophical subject. After reading only one sentence, I said to him, "No, you must not become an aeronaut."
Although Wittgenstein spent so many years in Cambridge, he was never at ease with the clannish, ritualistic and enclosed side of academic life. In fact, he thought it corrupt and much preferred the town to the gown. Like Nietzsche, he had a great need for freedom. He never married nor owned a house. He liked to live in digs, which he kept changing, and he frequently vanished altogether. When war broke out, he volunteered for the Austrian army.
Now I should have the chance to be a decent human being, for I'm standing eye to eye with death. May the Spirit bring me light. Understand people. Whenever you feel like hating them, try instead to understand them. Be at peace within yourself. But how do you find this peace in yourself? Only if I live in a way pleasing to God. Only so can one bear life.
The war destroyed the world Wittgenstein had grown up in. His life changed. He gave away his money and became a country school teacher in Austria. At the same time, he published the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. This famous book is the last great attempt to defend the traditional view that language can copy reality precisely and completely. What can be said clearly. What cannot be said clearly is not in the world, and one must be silent about it. When a few years later Wittgenstein designed and built this house for his sister, he gave his teaching visible form. Wittgenstein's approach to architecture was stringently functional. Everything had to be redesigned for the utmost simplicity, right down to this window latch, then precision engineered. And the result is not inhuman. Windows and doors match the shape of the human body. They're doubled for silence and insulation, and there are heating grills below them. The whole thing is exact and spare and sublime, like Wittgenstein's philosophy. And as with his philosophy, what's left out is even more important than what's left in.
The sense of the world must lie outside the world. In the world, everything is as it is, and everything happens as it does happen. In it, no value exists. God does not reveal himself in the world, feeling the world as a limited whole. It is this that is mystical.
What did Wittgenstein mean by God in his early philosophy? The house gives a clue. After a while, the geometrical tranquility of this place begins to remind us of a mosque, a place where God is so exalted and transcendent that no image at all is possible. Can you imagine an idea of God so exalted that the sense of the presence of God and the sense of the absence of God coincide? Or put it another way, by its extreme rigor, the house creates a sense, it gives a hint of an absolute standard of purity by which human life should be guided and assessed. Wittgenstein once said he liked the idea of a silent religion. Silence tells no lies. Silence does not deceive.
We feel that even when all possible scientific questions have been answered, the problems of life remain completely untouched. Of course, there are then no questions left, and this itself is the answer. The solution of the problem of life is seen in the vanishing of the problem. What we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence.
In 1929, 40 years old now, Wittgenstein unexpectedly reappeared in Cambridge after a 16-year absence, and soon began teaching. From 1933, word went round that in his classes in Trinity College, he was developing an entirely new philosophy. The classes were held in this room at the head of K Staircase in Whewell's Court. By the window, his writing table, the shoeboxes in which his notes were stored, and the deck chair in which he habitually sat. The austerity and bareness of the room, which was his own living room as well as his teaching room, reflects his Tolstoyan personality and style of life. As each student arrived, he or she collected a wooden folding chair from the landing outside. It was unwise to be late. The class met twice a week for a grueling 2-hour session. We know Wittgenstein planned these sessions carefully because the published students' notes of them tally with his own unpublished manuscripts. But during the class, Wittgenstein thought aloud and occasionally terrified the students by questioning them. What is philosophy? Here's an example. Every day we ask each other the time and answer without any hesitation. But suppose one day we ask ourselves, what is time? Now we suddenly seem to be landed with a genuine classical philosophical problem, a very difficult one. Wittgenstein says that these problems arise through a disease of language. A myth has held us captive. We're caught up in the idea that words are names and that the meaning of a word is the thing that it stands for. And then we start investigating what that thing can possibly be. Wittgenstein had himself held such a view, but now he was trying to shake it off. Instead, he asks us to see words as doing jobs. Words are tools of many different kinds. Words are like chess pieces. The meaning of a piece is its powers, the part it can play in furthering the game. Well, all language is like that. We play games with language. Our language is a function of the way we live. It's a tool of social interaction. Now, this may sound rather abstract, but in fact it changes everything. The old theory of meaning summoned up great nebulous abstractions which philosophers then worried about. But Wittgenstein's new point of view is strictly practical. Look at the grammar, he says. Look at the way the language works. If only you can see that clearly, you'll see all there is to see.
Look at the grammar of ethical terms, and such terms as God, soul, mind. One of the chief troubles is that we take a substantive to correspond to a thing. The words soul and mind have been used as though they stood for a thing, a gaseous thing. What is the soul is a misleading question.
So what will become of morality and religion on this new point of view? I think you can guess. Wittgenstein has a deep respect for the practice of morality and religion, but like Tolstoy, he's deeply mistrustful of the theory. On the whole, he thinks of religious beliefs not as being factual, but rather in terms of the job they do in shaping our lives. Until recently, not much more was known than that. But now a lot of fragments of Wittgenstein's observations and his private notes on religion have come to light. They show how deeply his thought about religion was embedded in everyday life.
One of my pupils, on my advice, has gone to work at Woolworths. Now that is the sort of thing you should do. Try and get a job in some large store where you will meet ordinary people. What is the use of studying philosophy if all that it does for you is to enable you to talk with some plausibility about some abstruse questions of logic, etc., and if it does not improve your thinking about the important questions of everyday life? It is, if possible, still more difficult to think really honestly about your life and other people's lives. And the trouble is that thinking about these things is not thrilling, but downright nasty. God grant the philosopher insight into what lies in front of everyone's eyes. Not how the world is the mystical, but that it is. To renounce the pomps and vanities of this wicked world. Just think what that would really involve. Who of us today even thinks of doing such a thing? We all want to be admired. St. Paul said, "I die daily." Just think what that must have meant. For all you and I can tell, the religion of the future will be without any priests or ministers. I think one of the things you and I have to learn is that we have to live without the consolation of belonging to a church. Christianity is not a doctrine, not, I mean, a theory about what has happened or will happen to the human soul, but a description of something that actually takes place in human life. For consciousness of sin is a real event, and so are despair and salvation through faith. Perhaps we can say, only love can believe the resurrection. This can come about only if you no longer rest your weight on the earth, but suspend yourself from heaven. Then everything will be different, and it will be no wonder if you can do things that you cannot do now. A man who is suspended looks the same as one who is standing, but the interplay of forces within him is nevertheless quite different, so that he can act quite differently than can a standing man. An honest religious thinker is like a tightrope walker. He almost looks as though he were walking on nothing but air. His support is the slenderest imaginable, and yet it really is possible to walk on it.
When in 1949 Wittgenstein learnt that he was fatally ill with cancer, he told his doctor that he did not want to die in hospital. His doctor offered a room in his own home when it should become necessary. Over a year went by, and then a few months before his death, Wittgenstein arrived to take up residence in this room. Here he continued working until 2 days before the end. Wittgenstein, like Nietzsche, was a solitary, passionate and compelling figure. Both of them were tormented by the ultimate questions of life. Nietzsche broke his mind trying to force a new way through them. Wittgenstein took a different route. He sought a cure. 30 years before, he'd written that the answer to the riddle of life lies in the disappearance of the question. So he patiently unravels our illusions and forces us to return to the ethical reality of the everyday. When we see that our common life is all, that realization is religion. Wittgenstein's point of view is very down to earth and very agnostic. All we can see clearly is the way our language works in the games we play. So we can see how belief in God works and how it ought to shape our lives. But then we must stop at that. To this day, many people find this new point of view unnerving. Wittgenstein's so clear that belief in God requires conversion of life, truthfulness, inner integrity. He's equally clear that that's all there is to be said. We must be cured of the old, speculative, metaphysical impulse. So what would you call him? Would you say this is religious agnosticism? Or a mysticism of the everyday? Or simply that it is and always was just the truth of the matter? What have you made of the story we've been telling in this series about how the modern crisis of faith developed? Science first mechanized nature and then embedded us in it. Biblical criticism demythologized the Bible. Radical humanism argued that the only world that can possibly be for us is our own human world. And then the study of other religions suggested that no one religion, not even Christianity, is likely to be absolute. Finally, we came to our fluid, uncertain modern world where there are as many points of view as there are people. And there seems to be no center anymore, no absolute standard or reference point. Now, to many people, this must seem the story of a long decline, a sea of faith, the tide going right out. As they see it, any faith or philosophy of life must start from a set of big, reassuring answers to the big questions. That's the basis. And when those answers and even the questions begin to look rather shaky, people feel that religion's becoming impossible. I don't agree. Skepticism, as well as certainty, can drive you to faith. We saw that as far back as Pascal. Only it leads you to see religion in a different way, not as a set of grand answers, but simply as a spiritual path. When I look into the void of the modern situation and I see that it's entirely up to me what I'm to make of myself and my life, then I find I need religion to give me a path, to give my soul shape, to give me categories to live by, goals to pursue. I'm a priest in the Church of England, and I practice in a rather traditional way. But when I say the creed, I regard it not as giving me supernatural information, but as showing me a way to walk in. You may not agree, but in a way that's only to be expected. For our whole message has been that in the modern situation, the individual stands absolutely alone with his freedom before the ultimate questions of life. You must decide. We've finished now. It's over to you.
2025, take 8 on the end.